I don't want to use my real name, so let's just call me Evelyn. So the first 7 weeks that I was with Kevin, he was extremely charming, extremely smooth, pedantic in the home, in his personal dress, the way he smelt, the way he looked. You know, there wasn't a hair out of place. And, you know, he was the epitome of the Prince Charming.
I'm Ashlea Hansen. You're listening to episode 7 of Dear Rachelle, a podcast by True Crime Australia. This is the untold story of Rachelle Childs, a 23-year-old who was brutally murdered. Her killer has never been caught. Evelyn met Kevin Stephen Carell when she was 38 at a singles mingles party in Sydney. They dated for about 6 weeks, just over a year after Rachelle's murder. You'll be hearing a lot more from Evelyn and another key witness in this episode. We've given both pseudonyms. Let's go back to 2002. Publicly, the police investigation had gone very quiet. Behind the scenes, it was turmoil. The strike force was in disarray, and there was a growing pool of persons of interest. By this point, Kevin Carell, Rachelle's boss at Camden Holden, was under intense pressure. Detectives had formally interviewed him and raided his home, and he was considered a suspect by police. But he was carrying on with his life as normal. Kevin Carell denies any involvement in Rachelle's murder, and he has provided police with a detailed account of his movements on the night in question.
When did you meet Kevin?
I met Kevin at a singles night in Sydney. He was there with quite a lot of people, and one of them turned out to be my uncle.
And how would you describe Kevin?
Extremely smooth, charismatic, attentive, not what you would think, not your average man. On a mission every time I seen him as far as women were concerned, because obviously I didn't date him immediately. He was very, you know, like the prince of the party, floating about, lighting cigarettes for people and getting drinks and pulling out chairs and all that sort of chivalry.
You're going to hear a lot more about Kevin Carell and allegations about how he attracts women, treats them, and reacts when they leave him. Remember, Kevin changed his surname from Cornwall to Carell after being acquitted of multiple sex attacks on young women across Sydney in the 1980s. Kevin has always maintained his innocence over these attacks. This episode focuses on 2 of his ex-girlfriends. You just met Evelyn. The other we're calling Alice, another fictitious name. Alice's former boyfriend has agreed to be interviewed. We'll call him Colin. Alice met Kevin a year before Rachelle's death and was still seeing him when Rachelle was killed. But the relationship was well and truly over by the time she met Colin.
And when you've spoken to her in recent days about participating in the podcast or talking to me, what was her reaction about that?
I've had one conversation and asked her, and she said it was a very dark time, and obviously because she'd had to give evidence at a coroner's inquest and that sort of thing, and a lot of intimate detail, she said I couldn't go through that again, and so has declined to come to this. Yep.
That gives you a bit of an insight into how traumatised she is about that experience in her life.
Yes, it would have had to have played heavily on the mind, and also that it was her partner. Very hurtful and, deeply distressing for her.
Remember, this is 2002, a year after the murder. Detectives were ramping up their investigation into Kevin's possible involvement. By this time, Kevin had voluntarily participated in 2 interviews with police. Alice and Kevin had broken up, and she'd just begun dating Colin. But there was a shift in Kevin's behaviour when Colin came onto the scene.
Alice had received phone calls from a gentleman who was a previous partner or boyfriend had objected to me being around. I spent most of my time at her place at this time, and so I suppose he saw it as I'd moved in there. And so he objected to that, and then he then started ringing Alice and making abusive phone calls at that time and saying that that he objected to her seeing me.
We're going to bounce between Colin and Evelyn's recollections in this episode. Evelyn and Colin's partner Alice both gave evidence at the coronial inquest into Rachelle's death. At the conclusion of the inquest in 2008, the coroner made an open finding in relation to Rachelle's death.
So over a few weeks, probably 4 or 5 weeks, I went to Sydney with my girlfriends. He would be at the events, of course, because he'd say, "Oh, I'll see you there," and that's how it went. So I never stayed at his house or went to his house at all in that time, because obviously I've got children, responsibilities. But he did eventually, as we dated more, he came up for barbecue 3 or 4 times through the week after work at one of the many jobs apparently that he had, and then it progressed from there.
And so what did he tell you about himself when he first met you?
He told me that he was a psychiatrist, one or the other. I can't exactly say. But he did, at one barbecue in particular, I had my sister there, and he offered to write a script for her for medication for, being a little bit depressed or upset or whatever. And I didn't challenge that at all. And then he told me that he worked at a car sales yard on the weekend occasionally for a mate and helped him out. So he disclosed that he had those 2 jobs.
When I was asked Alice about details, that he was mad on these science, like detective books, where he was very well versed on, how evidence was collected. And I think at some stage he claimed that he was worked in security and was armed with a firearm and things like that. It was like he was sort of fixated on that type of, darker side of life.
Did he tell Alice that he was a private investigator?
Yeah, she did mention that to me at one stage. The way he spoke sometimes is he thought he was some sort of big-time gangster.
And did you believe him that he was a psychiatrist or a psychologist?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. Stupid as that sounds, I did. Because the clothing and the mannerism, the jewellery, all the finery went along with that job. I knew he wasn't a truck driver.
And when did it become apparent to you that he wasn't a psychologist or a psychiatrist?
Probably about 3 or 4 weeks later. It was when we got invited to a Christmas party. It was at Planet Hollywood in the city. A beautiful night, very well catered for, and everyone was dressed to the nines. And a lot of the colleagues of his there, friends and whatnot, talked to him, and he had a couple of drinks. He was, discussing cars and what's been sold and what hasn't been sold, and I'm thinking, this is a full-time job. This is not just helping a mate out of a Saturday or a Sunday. You're a car salesman. I didn't really confront him with that, because that particular night was when he became very left of field, got very aggressive through the night verbally, and I'm a bit of a social butterfly. I'm not a flirt by any means, and never have been. I talk to everybody. I'm courteous and kind, and he found that extremely offensive, especially at the end of the night when I was going to get into the car. He basically said, "You acted like a slut. You looked like a slut." My previous partner was extremely wealthy. I was wearing like a $3,000 black Versace dress. It was beautiful. You know, I'm not the person who has bra straps hanging out or boobs or any of the rest of it. And I thought I conducted myself with his work colleagues amazingly because I don't drink. You know, he was having a few scotches and in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have got in the car. But I was actually a bit nervous because he was it was like a penny had been flipped. So we did drive home and he stayed that night. Didn't speak the whole time in the car, except for when we were out of the car when he spoke to me like he did. And knowing that I had my parents at my house looking after my daughter and my other children at the time, I was a bit concerned that if I ruffled the boat that it mightn't be nice. I don't want the children hearing anything like that. They'd already been through enough of hearsay. So I tried really hard to keep the peace and diffuse the situation. And I got up and, would you like a coffee? And it was basically, I'm going. And I went, okay. So that really, really unnerved me. And I decided straight away, I think I remember having coffee downstairs with my parents and saying, look, I'm just not okay with this. Something's not right here. He's told me that he's this, and he's definitely not. He's definitely a car salesman. It was like a Jekyll and Hyde personality, and it frightened me.
Do you remember the kinds of things that he was saying to her on the phone that was making her upset?
When I then took the phone and had words with him, he then continued ringing, and they were quite abusive. I told him off a couple of times. He then became threatening.
I know in your evidence you said that he threatened to kill you. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, he did that on a number of occasions, yes. He had told me on one occasion that he was involved in some sort of organised crime syndicate. He intimated that he had friends who would get rid of me. He'd have his friends take care of me. I'd be dead by the end of the month. He then started to bring up stuff that Alice and I had discussed privately. And then I came to the realisation that he was somehow listening to our conversations. And he had made comment to Alice that he had the house bugged and that he was listening.
Let's return to Evelyn's recollections of her brief relationship with Kevin, which started over a year after Rachelle's murder. She wanted to stop seeing Kevin after the Christmas party incident, but he wooed her back in.
So, you know, a few phone calls and big bunches of flowers, and I'm so stupid, like I shouldn't have had those drinks. It's ridiculous me even saying those things. And so I got past it, because he hadn't like touched me or anything. I was very wary from that moment.
During our investigation, we've discovered Kevin moved back to the South Coast not long after Rachelle's murder. He settled into a seaside suburb called Warilla, south of Wollongong. He lived in this area before and wanted Evelyn to come and visit.
He rang and said, look, how about on the weekend I come and pick you up and I drive you to see my home? And I said, oh, that's hours away. Oh, I don't mind. That's okay. And I went, that would be lovely. Very pretty. I remember driving down the big road. You could see the whole harbour. So we got to he said it was house, but there was 3 units together, joined together. Anyway, went into his apartment and, he had prawns in the fridge, brought out this platter of prawns and champagne and lollies for my daughter. He poured me a glass of pink champagne and brought the prawns out. And I had probably half a glass. And he said, oh, how about if we go and take a walk over and I'll show you the beach and like where I live. And I went, oh, lovely. When we were going out to go over to the beach, I remember him saying, oh, come and have a look at my car. And I sort of looked at him and I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, no, I've got a really fancy car. Oh, okay, sorry, I thought you meant your car that we drove in. No, you need to come and have a look at this beautiful car. And it was a fancy car. I know nothing about cars at all. I went, oh, that's really lovely. And I wasn't very impressed because that, like, you know, I'm not a car person. I'm a glitter girl. And I said, oh, it's lovely. I said, oh, you know, what kind of car is it? For some reason, the name of the car always stuck with me because it was a really nice name. It was fancy. And he said it was a Walkinshaw.
Had big plans for the weekend, and she was supposedly getting a VL SS Group A, otherwise known as a Walkinshaw.
Rachelle spoke to me on the weekend about getting a VL Walkinshaw.
But I knew how excited she was about a Walkinshaw.
She told me that Camden Holden had just bought one and she was getting it as a loan car.
I remember, Walkinshaws were by far her favourite car.
She told me Kevin was going to loan her the car.
This particular name stuck in my head, and I never, I didn't think about it again.
We'll further explore Evelyn's claim Kevin showed off a Walkinshaw in the next episode. Let's continue to listen to Evelyn's account of her visit with her young daughter to Kevin's Wirralur apartment.
So over we went, and probably, I don't know, maybe there was a grassed area and then you went down onto these sort of pebbles on the beach, and I started to feel really unwell. Like almost a migraine, but nauseous as well. Then I started to feel very bizarre, like I was not myself. But my headache was like somebody had hit me in the head with a hammer, and I didn't feel right. And I'd never felt like that in my life. And I knew that it couldn't have been half a glass of champagne. That's just not possible. So with that, we walked for a little bit, and I said, look, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to go back. I feel quite unwell. And he went, oh, do you? And I went, yeah, okay, well, let's go back. So he sort of, hurried us back. And he said, oh, look, maybe you need to go and lie down for a while. I'll keep an eye on your daughter, which, I didn't really have any issues there. There was never anything inappropriate or creepy about her. And I said, yeah, okay, I'm just going to go to the bathroom because I actually feel like I'm going to be sick. So while I was in the bathroom, I could hear him talking to my daughter, and I rang my mum from the phone I had in my pocket. And I remember turning the tap on so it was loud. I made a few noises like I was vomiting, but I wasn't. And I said to my mother, this is where I am, and I think somebody needs to come and get me because I'm extremely ill and something's not right. She said, I can get somebody to come and get you, that's not a problem. And I walked out of the bathroom with the phone in my hand, and with that he said, who's on the phone? And I said, oh, it's my mum. I've just rang her because, look, I'm really not well and I need for us to get picked up, I need to go home. Really, really not happy about the conversation that I'd had my mother on the phone. And he said, no, that's okay. I will take you home. At this stage, I'd put my mum on loudspeaker so that he could hear her. And he just said, look, I'll bring them home. That's not a problem. And she said, well, I know exactly where you are, so I can have somebody there in half an hour to collect her if it puts you out. Like she was trying to keep things calm. No, that's okay. I'll pack her up now and I'll bring her straight up. So I probably took, over the 3-hour drive home with not a word said, nothing. 2 lots of Panadol and Nurofen. I was, the headache was just nothing like I'd ever felt. And he basically got me to home. Mum came out the front door. He handed the bag to Mum, and my daughter got out of the car and ran inside to my mum, and Mum came out the front door and got me, seeing that I was there, and he handed my mum my bag and just basically said to Mum, I'm going. And that was it, gone.
Have you ever reflected on your decision to ring your mum in that moment when you thought you'd been drugged and how things could have been differently if you didn't do that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. For myself, sorry. For myself, I would have been okay with whatever was the hand that I was to be dealt, but not for my daughter. So I had to fight, and it was hard because I felt really sick, and it wasn't just a normal sick. It was frighteningly sick, and I knew that I had to get out of there or get to someone or around someone. At first, I thought maybe, I would say, oh, look, could we go and have, an early dinner so that I was in a public place so that if I collapsed or something. And then I thought, no, I'm way too sick. I couldn't hold my head up. I was like, oh my God, it felt like my brain was going to explode. Disorientated, and, I've probably been drunk twice in my entire life.
Let's return to Colin's interview. He's telling me about threatening phone calls Alice was allegedly receiving from Kevin Carell after they'd broken up. The new couple was suspicious. Somebody was listening to their private conversations in Alice's home.
What he'd been doing is, because I thought it'd be pretty game of somebody to be coming in the front of the house and listening at the front window or at the door, because it'd be fairly risky if somebody was to go out that way. But then I felt what had happened is he'd been coming in through the back fence from the laneway and then coming down the yard and listening there so that people didn't see him going in and out. And then I sort of surmised then that was how he was listening to the conversations.
What do you think was his motivation to do that?
Oh, just intimidation.
And so you've been dropped off now after this experience, and what happened next?
Phone calls started coming, texting, whatever. And I was very adamant that this was no more. I was not right, frightened. When he rang me, it was very sweet, and how are you feeling, and da-da-da. And I said, look, I'm feeling much better, thank you, and I'm very grateful for you driving me home. And so is my mum and dad. But look, I'm in a position where I have got a very close family and a lot of things to do and sport and whatnot with my children. And I really am not in the right headspace to be dating anyone. It's not you, it's me. And he did try to persuade me, oh, don't be silly, I'm a good person and, you're lovely and all the rest of it. And I just said, no, look, I'm sorry. I can't. I just can't do this. I'm sorry. I really can't. So we just hung up, and then the text messages started coming, and they got a little bit nasty. You're a bitch, and you're I've done nothing wrong, and just the general crap that someone says when their feelings are hurt. And he rang me and he said, I want to talk to you. And I said, look, it's not going to change my mind. Just to reiterate, at the very beginning of the phone call when he was swearing and whatnot, he said to me, oh, you shouldn't let your daughter play in the street. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, oh, she's out there in a little yellow T-shirt and no shoes on her feet. So that frightened the daylights out of me, because that's exactly what she was out the front with her friends in a little yellow T-shirt.
There were matters that we had discussed around his past. I found out that he had worked at the Holden dealers with this Rachelle at the time that she was killed. Alice had said that she had been questioned about it, and I didn't think too much of it at the time. Work colleagues would have been questioned about her movement, so didn't think too much about it. When she was telling me about his demeanour and his actions at the time, I started to think this is quite strange, and asked her for more details, and sort of we had discussed it. And then there was another phone call, and then I was warned, you shouldn't have stuck your nose into it. You'll be dead before long anyway. It came the time that he rang and made threats against my son. So obviously the night before, Alice and I had been discussing what we were going to do on the weekend. We'd take my son to the zoo or something like that. And then the following night, he then rings up and makes threats against my son. And then that sort of then made it pretty clear that he'd been listening to our conversation at the time. And then I'd had an argument with him over the phone about this, and then I thought at that time, I said to Alice, I think we need to go and have a chat with the local police and just let them know what's happening in case he does become more aggressive, because at one time she did say that he had tried to force her off the road when she was, I believe it was coming home from work one day.
I got very angry and I said, you just keep right away and don't you dare call my phone again. And with that, he said, you're just a prick tease, and one of these days they're going to find you slit from the fanny to the throat in a car park dead. I think I said to him, that's charming. And I hung up. And I called out to my child and said, you are to come inside straight away. Rang my mother and got her to come straight round. And I rang the police and told them exactly what he had said to me and that I was concerned about my welfare and my child. And I had to go and do a statement, which I did. And it was filed, and he was given warning by the police to stay away, not contact me or any of the above.
It sounds like he was stalking and threatening Alice, and this behaviour is incredibly concerning for you as a partner at the time to Alice. What was going through your mind?
I did draw the line when he then made threats against my son. Yeah, that was, I thought I was going to have to deal with him then, and that was when I did say enough's enough. Instead of harassing women, which seems to be your form, I said, and threatening children, I'll meet you somewhere and we'll sort this out right now. And he hung up at that time.
So at that point, did you go to the police station? Which police station did you go to, and what happened next?
Picton Police. I just wanted to make them aware of what was going on at that time. We went in, introduced ourselves to a constable that was on the counter on the night, and started to tell him about instances that were happening, and he asked for the name. We gave him the name, Kevin Carell, and then a sergeant came from a back room and said, excuse me, what was that name that you just said? Repeated it, and then he said, I'll take it from here. I think we need to have a chat.
And probably a couple of days later, I got a phone call from what I was told was his brother. But I would probably stake my life this conversation with his brother trying to ask me to, don't be silly. He would never do anything to you. He would never hurt you. He's just angry that you're not together and da-da-da. I would stake my life that I was talking to Kevin. It was not. There's no way it was his brother. And after that, I didn't get any more phone calls. I think I might have even blocked the number out. I think that's sort of where him and I, the demise was there.
What is it about that statement that you think police were particularly interested in?
Not so much about the things that were happening at the time, but caused Alice to go back, things that she described to me that I thought were very odd about his actions and his demeanour at that period of time. And I then started to think he had been using her at one point when she described on the night that the girl disappeared that he had been using her for an alibi. And then I thought, had you told the police this before? She had said no. I asked why. They hadn't asked me. So I said, I think you need to have a chat to them and start to give them a few more details. And then it went from there.
Can you specifically recall what it was about what Alice said that made you think someone is using her as an alibi?
His actions on the night, going and calling her up fairly late to come around for dinner, which he said was out of character. And then there was another instance where he had come around and he was so distraught about the death of this Rachelle that she felt it was over the top. And then from there, she had asked him to leave on that night, then became concerned about him, went looking for him, and he was in the local pub playing the poker machines and was quite happy after being so distraught only, a short time earlier. So that I thought was sort of quite unusual, and that's when I suggested we go and have a chat to the police.
Those allegations in early 2002 prompted police to put an apprehended violence order in place to protect Alice. It was in that same year Evelyn was dating Kevin and learned about Rachelle's death.
He brought it up in a conversation. He said, I've had a rough day today. I've had to go and give DNA sample. And I went, what? A young girl actually at work has been murdered. And I went, oh my God, that's so frightening. And he said, yes. He said she was found and she was burnt and she used to work at the car sales yard. And everybody who worked with her obviously has to give DNA because, they're trying to find out what's going on. And I went, oh, that is so terrible. And I said, are you all right with, oh, yeah, it's just sad. There's a lot of people being called in. I really didn't think anything of it.
And what was Kevin's demeanour when he told you this?
Oh, very sombre, he was just discussing with me something that happened at work. It wasn't like he was brokenhearted or anything. Later on down the track, and I can't remember when I asked these questions, it was starting to bug me. So I sort of said, oh, have you heard any more about that young girl? And he said, oh, yeah, it's really awful, that they found her body and it was burnt and, they cut her fingers off because, when you steal from the bikies, that's what they do. So that's probably the track that they're going to go looking down. And I went, oh, my God, that's so terrible. He wasn't emotional at all, very stone-faced. It was just a conversation.
Alice would later tell Colin and police about a worrying trip to the South Coast that she made with Kevin not long after Rachelle had been killed. According to Alice, Kevin drove her through 7 Mile Beach at Jiroa, pointing out where Rachelle's burning body had been discovered.
She had told me about an instance where he had taken her they'd gone for a drive one day and he'd taken her to the site where Rachelle was found. Details that he'd given about it, and in particular there was one where he had said he had been blaming bikies for it. He'd been sort of pushing that pitch, and then also it was at that time that he said that fingers had been removed, which was a calling card of the bikies. He had sort of emphasised that in conversations with her to sort of make her think that he had nothing to do with it. It was that all bikie related. He said that this is where it was, which again, that I thought was quite odd. One, how did he know the exact location, and how would he have certain details like that were not publicised? How would he have those sorts of details?
She's so young, why would she be involved with bikies?
And did he tell you why he believed that or why he held that view?
No.
What was his demeanour when he was telling you this story about the bikies?
He was smooth. He was, cooking spaghetti, I think, on the stove, and would you like a cup of coffee? And I actually felt like, okay, this is actually all right.
Kevin was blaming bikies to anyone who asked questions about Rachelle's murder. And this was all laid bare at Rachelle's inquest, which began at Glebe Coroner's Court in Sydney in 2006. Rachelle's initial autopsy revealed at least one of her fingers had been detached from her hand. But investigators thought this was a tightly held secret until key witnesses started to tell police information only investigators and the killer would likely know.
So take me to the inquest. When were you told that you were needed to give evidence, and what was that experience like? What happened?
I remember the detectives ringing me and speaking to me about what would happen when I got there and who would be there, and that I was safe and that I wouldn't run into Kevin or really anyone else I knew, which I was really happy about. I think they just wanted to make me feel comfortable because I was really scared. So I arrived at the coroner's court. Then when I went in, myself and the next person who was going to give evidence, this particular lady was allowed to listen to what I had to say. And I spoke about Kevin's demeanour and his behaviour, and that how I was told that Rachelle had died, but I left out the fact that I knew that her fingers were severed. Sorry. Because I was looking at a mum and dad. And I felt sick, and I thought that it wasn't necessary for me to say that. The details weren't important. And that's how I thought. And, I remember sitting there in that dock looking at them thinking, oh, my God, I've got to talk about your baby. This is just, awful. So I gave my statement and, my evidence that day. And I remember walking in and my hair was pulled back in a bun, and I had a black suit on with a white blouse underneath and a pair of pearl earrings. When I walked out of the dock where I was sitting, back into my seat, the next witness was called, and she stood up and she walked to the dock, and I thought I was looking at myself. She had the same suit on, the same earrings, the same hair pulled back. I think her hair was lighter than mine, and I was shocked.
Evelyn was looking at Alice. It would be the first time Kevin's ex-partners would cross paths. Inside the courtroom during the inquest of Rachelle Childs. It was a surreal moment for both of them.
She'd obviously already seen me. I was allowed to stay in the courtroom because I'd already given my evidence, and she was the last person, I'm pretty sure, of the day.
But in terms of your evidence, so you've finished your evidence, you've sat down, and Alice has got up to give her evidence. And how did that sit with you when you were listening to her recollections?
Yeah, quite shocking, but not, because it sounded like mine. It was very, there was probably more the things that I had said. I did hold back because I was so emotionally distraught over these parents sitting there. It was very eye-opening to see this lady up there, but I did feel like I was looking at myself.
Clearly upset about having to do it, and then I wasn't in the room, but there was a conversation between her and Rachelle's family. And
I remember the detectives coming over to me, girl detective Haywood, asked whether Rachelle's mum and dad could speak to me, and Alice. And we said yes, of course. And I remember her put her hand over the top of my hand and she said, I'm so glad that you're here to be able to tell your story. She said, I really and truly am. And it was heartbreaking. All of it was heartbreaking. And it rocked, it rocked my world for a very long time.
And I believe they thanked her for coming forward.
And it ate me away to think that there was things that I, may have been able to remember, but I tried. But when I was leaving, Detective Haywood said to me, you can go and if there's anything at all that you can remember, no matter how difficult it is or how sad you think it's going to make somebody, I need you to call me and I need you to tell me what it is. And I remember coming home and I couldn't sleep that night because I would keep remembering, oh my God, this has happened, that's happened, listening to Alice's story as well. And I rang the detective and I said, I don't know whether this is significant or not, and I didn't want to say it in front of the parents yesterday, but Kevin, on a few different occasions, 2 that I can recall, said to me that Rachelle's fingers were severed by bikies. That's what you do when you steal from bikies. Now, I said, I'm sorry, but I just didn't want to say that in front of her parents. I just didn't want to. So with that, she said, okay, I don't want you to talk about this to anybody and I will contact you tomorrow morning. So 24 hours had passed and she contacted me and said that there's been a decision to exhume Rachelle's body.
It's been a dramatic day in the murder inquest of Rachelle Childs, whose burnt body was found 5 years ago on a lonely South Coast road.
Broke my heart. I felt sick that the parents would have to go through that.
The court was told how her body has been exhumed, revealing that one of her fingers was missing.
To my knowledge, no one else had said that.
And one of the few who knew that was the major suspect in the case.
He's now the prime suspect in the murder of Rachelle Childs, grandfather of 2, Kevin Correll.
So what did Alice say that Kevin would bring up about Rachelle in terms of their relationship?
She did feel that it was odd that he did talk about it quite a bit.
Kevin Correll is the last person of interest, and it's a position he'd rather not be in.
But you were left feeling that Alice felt like he had some sort of fixation on Rachelle.
Yes.
Sitting in the stand, Kevin Correll was told Rachelle's body has recently been exhumed.
How would you describe him from what you know and your experience with him?
He's the devil.
In court, Mr. Correll's lawyer declared it's trench warfare.
He's the devil. And that is the nicest word that I can use.
On the next episode of Dear Rachelle.
Mr. Correll was the witness. Our purpose is not to trap him unfairly, but to persuade him to tell the truth.
When we went to Leppington to exhume her, I wasn't allowed to tell anyone.
Because Kevin did put a rumour out that that's what bikies do.
And she was actually with the medical examiner at the time that Kevin was on the stand giving evidence.
The Walkinshaw featured heavily in this inquest.
Evan, her boss, told her that a Walkinshaw was coming into the car yard.
He said, oh, come and have a look at my car. I said it was a Walkinshaw.
Kevin Correll's got one and was seen a year later in a garage. Was that ever discovered at the time?
I think that the Walkinshaw is the key to this.
Dear Rachelle is a multimedia production from True Crime Australia. If you want to be one of the first to find out what happens next, go to dearrachelle.com.au. That's where eligible Digital News Corp Australia subscribers get early access to podcast episodes and breaking news in our live investigation. And you will also find exclusive videos, interactive evidence, feature articles and more. That's dearrachelle.com.au. If you have any tips or confidential information to share with me, Ashlea Hansen, please send an email to dearrochelle@news.com.au. Our supervising producer and audio editor is Reese Gunter. Rachel Fountain is executive producer and audio director. Our executive editor is Sarah Blake. Our senior journalist is Patrick Carline. Video editors are Gillian McNally, Owen Yang and Stephen Woods. Picture editors are Jeff Darmanin and Kristy Miller. Senior camera operators are Daniel Andrews and Oscar Vieira, with sound design by Martin Peralta. Thanks also to Greg Thompson, Eleni Paneras, Shoba Rayo, Faye Gould, Vanessa Graham, Hayley Goddard, Stephen Grice, Charlotte Karp, Tina Coggins and Harry Hughes. Special thanks to the Daily Telegraph editor Ben English. And Dear Rochelle would not be possible without the help and unwavering support of Kristy and Anne Childs, Mindy Wicks, Damian Loone and Rochelle's friends. This podcast series is hosted and investigated by me, Ashlea Hansen.